Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, another episode with Rich Klein. We talked about variations, some of the philosophy about how we classified and cataloged and how he's doing that now. Thanks sponsors, COMC, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggins and Scott Auctions, Tops, Upper Deck, and Panini. So apologize for the bad audio. Rich and I tried to do it on Zoom, and we had some technical problems, which I think were on my end. And so we went to the phone, and the phone hookup was not great. So apologize for that, but always a good time talking to Rich. And I thought poor audio of good content is better than good audio of bad content. Anyway, thanks, Rich, and thanks, listeners. Here it is.
If we were to break out all the 74 Topps checklist variations, because those cards lovingly have one or two asterisks on the back, a very obvious variation. But when we were doing the Beckett catalogs, we never bothered to break them out because there was no real reason.
What do you mean by that?
That would be a line in the blurb. These cards come with one or two asterisks on the back, and the prices are the same.
And we think they're equal supply?
Correct.
Two printing plants or two different sheets, two different machines?
I think it's two different printing presses, just like 62 green tints, 69 Topps white letters.
One of my points is from the very beginning of cataloging, which is Jefferson Burdick. In fact, the way he called the sets was mainly about the card fronts. Of course, he's famously pasting his cards into albums. So he almost had disrespect for the card backs. Any variation on the front was serious. Any variation on the back was minor in most cases. So I think one or two asterisks in the fine print of the back of a 74 Topps checklist card, when there's no perceived difference in the value, that's no harm, no foul, except there may be a few purists out there that want to have a master set, but that's an extreme master set to me.
I understand that, but my point is we show every card at COMC, front and back. We did not show, obviously, every card in Beckett. So breaking them out in COMC makes it obvious. I think that's one important difference.
The other important difference is we can say we were doing cataloging, but most people thought we were doing price guides, but we were doing both.
Yes.
And COMC is cards for sale. They're doing commerce. They have a marketplace, and yet they also have a catalog. But did you have requests for that to break them out into two different kinds?
I did that myself back in the day. We have another set that came up that's a similar circumstance, but I wanted to talk about the one we've done. Because I like breaking out because I believe personally, and this is just a personal belief, that we want to take care of the uber collector, the collector who buys everything. And there are always people that buy the stuff. To me, breaking out something like that, which is an obvious variation, even if it's obscure and on the back, is worth doing. Just like we did at Beckett, break out the 84 Donruss Diamond King variations, cards like 1 to 26, with the Perez Field with no E, and then the correct factory set versions with the E.
Yeah, but then there were a bunch of superstars in there, and that was more of the day. There was a whole following for Diamond Kings.
A couple of things I thought about. There's a lot of work to break out cards since they're done individually. If you have 50 cards or 40 cards or 30 cards and you want to separate them, you have to separate them. They don't magically go. Somebody's actually got to do the work. So my questions 2, 3, and 4 are kind of related. Is it worth doing that? What is the ROI on breaking out a variation like that? Does it help the hobby to do all that?
The first situation that we experienced, because we were around, is that you have to know where to look. So with COMC or any of the cataloging we did, you had to know where to look to be able to recognize the difference, and then you could list it as such. After the initial work is done, for example, for one of the checklists, then after you see that has it, then you're looking for all the checklists to see which ones of them, if they in fact all have the 1-star, 2-star variations. It's not just looking at a jumbled pile of cards and trying to figure out what it is. You get something in and you recognize the pattern. If it's a one-off, Rich, that may not be worth it. especially if there's no demand and you don't see any interest in it. But when every checklist is that way, you might have some people that want to collect both.
Yeah, I think the ultimate team collector would want both varieties. The other question becomes, do you think that once you get that, would you as a cataloger, assuming when that is done, would you make them, and then you can also talk about all this as a COMC user as well. Should you break them out into two sets or make them variations? You and I have talked about this not on the podcast, but I think there's cases to be made for each way of doing that.
The thing I like about COMC is that if it's two different sets, they are related. In other words, it's like having the Stadium Club and then the first day. So in the listing of or members only, that you know it's the same set with a slight difference, and the listings are linked. Even if it's more than one set, it's linked. On the other hand, what you're talking about, when the card fronts are exactly the same and there's only one or two asterisks on the back, to me, that is a variation within one set because the card fronts are exactly the same.
As a seller, what would you prefer?
I'm a Jefferson Burdick follower. I think it's mainly about the front of the card. If you're showing somebody your collection, whether in plastic sheets or whatever, if two cards look exactly the same on the front, there's a little bit of redundancy there. Unless it's really interesting on the back that they're different, then I guess I would not be that much of an ultimate master set collector. When I think of the sets I master collected, they were post-serial, which were recognizable in their differences on the front. 48, 49 Leaf Baseball, again, recognized by the color variations and some of the sleeve kind of things on the front. So I'm a little big on if there's a difference on the front, then you need to list that and recognize that. And that's easier to see. But to flip every card over, like you did the last show, a traded line or the lack of a traded line, that's more than just one asterisk, an extra asterisk. That's substantive content that's either there or not there. And in one case, it can be very rare. And people do collect. The vintage variation collectors are out there.
Yeah, I will tell you the one backs, and I will just say this as the one backs that I wish they had never done as many variations as they did are the 54 Bowman backs.
With all the fielding percentages and things like that?
Yeah, exactly.
What do you mean they?
They meaning Bowman. I thought they only had one printing press.
You're saying, number one, they shouldn't have corrected them. Yet, when I got in the hobby, those had already been identified. So I did not have to do the original research on those. Those had already surfaced, and there were some purist collectors that tried to get both variations of, and again, most of them I think are common players.
Yeah, I think there's only one or two stars, and obviously the Ted Williams, Jimmy Pearsall number 66, that matters.
Yes.
But you can tell Williams by the front. So you would fronts for you and really important stuff on the back that's the key for a variation. Not something minuscule, or even if there's some lines that don't look right in the stats or something, if they miss a line of stats, or if the headers on the back are not aligned properly.
It needs to be something that has some repetition. It can't be a one-off. Even the Frank Thomas no name on front, that's on the front, and it's either there or not there. If there were only one of those, it would be a printing defect. But there are enough of them that you could say, hey, there's some of them out there that could be listed as legit variation.
I wish I remember, because the first one we ever got into the house at Beckett, our director of printing, or whatever his technical term was, Reed Poole, looked at the card and explained the printing reasons why the no name on front was a legit card. It had to do with the color missing.
Yeah. If all of one color is missing, that's a printing defect. But if you see other black, but it's missing black there, then that's a change. That's something that's a different plate or a mistake. Who else is doing work on variations? I think our former company really did an awful lot on that. And kudos to you, Rich, because you really went after that. So we were aggressively trying to find the meaningful variations. And if in doubt, I think we were listing it just so that we could show, yes, we're aware of that. COMC has a little bit different motivation, but if it helps people sell cards, or it demonstrates that COMC is trying to serve the hobby well and be able to identify the cards. Again, there's a lot of cards that you see on some of these sites where you'll only see the front of the card and you don't see the back of the card. Showing the front and the back of the card with the Beckett catalogs, so frequently we were just showing a type card in some sets. I wish we had the real estate to show the front and the back, because even though I'm saying the front is more important, there's certain sets are just way better to sort or identify from the back.
Then you get sets like you talked about Burdick and T206. There's a lot of dedicated T206 collectors that try, if they have a specific player, every different back of that player, including the different printing press 25.
The number of subjects and all that. Yeah, there's a different expectation when you're talking about 1-year-old cards and 100-year-old cards. The older variations that have stood the test of time, we have the chance to look back, whereas these new variations are slight differences where we're wondering, is it worth it to identify those when the current hobby, the younger and more modern collectors have moved away from obscure variations?
The thing with these 1-year-old cards, and we'll use Panini Prism, we'll pick on Panini. We could pick on Topps too for some of these. But there can be 42 different versions of Panini Prism parallels. They call those rainbows nowadays. Good luck to find. Try to complete a rainbow by itself is a pretty momentous task.
It's not even that. It's to identify which one it is. If they're serially numbered to some strange number, but whether it's orange or gold, there's a number of things. You don't know it when you see it. It looks too similar to something else that's unnumbered. My feedback to Tim Getch last National was when they do their new user interface for their software for going on the site and looking at cards, if the little thumbnails of the card front and the card back, if you could make those a little bit bigger, it'd be easier to recognize the color or the pattern or these other subtle things. If it was a 50% bigger image, you'd have a better chance of seeing is that pink or magenta or red or purple or whatever. Even with a small thumbnail, you can't even really, even with the most advanced monitors, I just think with a small thing, it's really hard to tell what color it is.
Trying to tell the difference sometime between red and magenta and fuchsia and all those things that are very close, or blue and purple. Those could be good luck you need.
But COMC, we can't send it in to them saying what it is. You just send it in and they have to figure it out. They have a tough job and they're not always right. They're trying. COMC, when they're listing the cards frequently, they're looking at the high-res scan. The card has already been filed away. So they're at a disadvantage. And then when I'm trying to evaluate and price the cards that I've submitted, I'm also just looking at a scan. Now, I might remember that last month or whenever it was, I submitted it. And I might remember, yeah, I submitted that and it was this version, but sometimes that can get lost. And if you don't watch it very closely, it's tricky.
It's very tricky. Jim, remember, I'm looking at scans.
And I know. That's hard. It's way harder.
It doesn't frustrate me. I take my best guess, and I'm just going to use this as an example, is 96 Leaf Signature Series. I'm trying to figure out the difference between bronze and gold. Even on the scans, they're very similar. But yeah, that is something. Even if you're looking at the cards in person, sometimes you can't figure it out.
There's two problems. Number one, just even knowing to look. And that's why I like it when COMC has for the set, they have not explicitly parallels, but there's parallels because of these variations. And if they list them there, at least you can know, hey, maybe it's that. Whereas if you didn't know it, you wouldn't even know to look. When I don't look, I just think this looks like a base card, but really it was gold instead of silver on that one line on the Donruss Preferred. And it's not even very gold. It's more bronzish gold. But I can see there isn't a bronze. There's silver mainly, and it's very subtle, and it's just a thin line.
Shout out to Upper Deck. On a lot of their products, they put what the parallel is on the back of the card. Not on every one.
A lot of orange slice is pretty obvious, I think, but
oh, they were still putting it on the card.
I want to affirm that. I'd love to see more description on the card, but we've got lots of requests that make work for the card companies. But ultimately, it's going to help the collector be more knowledgeable. If you knew to look right under the card number to see if there's some kind of an attribute or something that would give you a clue as to whether this is the base version or a variation. In fact, some of the Topps cards say this is a variation, a post variation or something like that. I'm all for that. I'm all for that.
For a couple of years, really good job with Heritage.
Yeah.
And would say it is variation or color variation. They were doing a really good job for a couple of years.
You have to flip it over. And you flip it over if you recognize that, hey, that is not the normal pose. But when you flip it over, it's confirmed, yes, this is the variation. or the SSP on some of these pose variations for the Topps flagship.
Most of the heritage cards, it's pretty obvious. Every once in a while, there's one you just want to say no. But most of the heritage cards are pretty obvious, that there's a difference.
I think they're obvious to you, Rich, and they're obvious side by side. But if you get a box of mishmash heritage cards of different years, I don't know that it jumps out at you unless if the regular card is a portrait shot and then the difficult variation is some kind of very obscure photo that's got all kinds of stuff going on that doesn't look like the normal average card in the set.
We're back to the original point where the fronts are the keys, but yet certain things like T206 backs matter.
Backs matter less, but they matter. Yeah, they matter less than the fronts, but they matter. And the more substantive the difference, the more they matter. And even the fronts, if it's a very subtle color change and you just don't know about the supply, then people don't chase that. But if it's serially numbered or a color match, then there could be extra demand. But it needs to pop. Usually that's not popping by having a second asterisk on the back of the checklist card. It's popping because the front of the card, hey, that looks different, that looks interesting. And frequently, it's more valuable because it's of a good player and harder to get, then there's heightened demand.